Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Visual Studio Remote Office Hours. My name is Matt Kristensen, and today we're going to talk about something that everyone that works at Microsoft probably has like some maybe nostalgic thought about, and of course that's hiring. We were all hired at some point, but how do we get hired to the developer division in Visual Studio? Developer division is where we build Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code and .NET and all these sort of developer technologies. And here to talk to us about that, we got Alex. Hello, Alex. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Hi. As mentioned, my name is Alex. My name is Alex Chi. I'm one of the group engineering managers here in DevDiv. My team is responsible for TypeScript, so hopefully you've heard of it, as well as TypeScript tools. So we build developer experiences for JavaScript, TypeScript experiences in Visual Studio, and we also ship components in VS Code. And so that's what my team does. But I also have the pleasure of working on recruiting. So I'm one of the recruiting champs in DevDiv. I focus on specifically industry recruiting, so folks that aren't coming from university or colleges, and I help coordinate that under our VP, Doug Armorall's team.
All right. So I think the first time I met you, Alex, you were leading the development team for the what was called the Internet Explorer F12 tools. Is that what it was called?
Yeah, so yep, blast from the past. A couple of years ago, I worked on the F12 tools, and then it was Edge. But yes, it goes back to Internet Explorer. But yeah, we did the diagnostic tools for Edge.
Yeah, and that of course was because that they are also in Visual Studio, because when we started building apps for Windows 8, they were web-based, HTML, JavaScript-based, and so we needed a debugger experience in Visual Studio, and so your team was responsible both for that tool in Visual Studio and in Internet Explorer /Edge, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so you've been around. You've been around the organization. You know your tech, and now you're also doing recruiting. How did you get into that?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, I've been recruiting for quite a while. When I first started back in 1990, it was one of the things that I wanted to do, mostly because I wanted to get involved with doing interviews. And back when I first started, we got to do kind of trips to go to colleges. So I started in college recruiting. But throughout my career, I've always had this opportunities to help build the teams and to participate in the interview process. And when I became a manager, it's kind of one of the things that we're expected to do, which is how do we build up the team when we have people leave or when we get new investments. It's up to the managers to actually create open job positions, recruit for the team, and bring in new talent. And so that's how I got involved with it back then. Most recently, going back to the F12 team, we had kind of reinvigorated the effort around it, and we had to build a new team. And so that's when I really got involved, like I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, really getting involved with kind of the recruiting process then, so that we can actually build the team. And so some of it was a necessity, but I've stuck with it, and I enjoy it quite a bit.
And you mentioned that you're recruiting industry hires only. Like, what type of hires do we have? We have industry. What else?
Yeah, great question. So we actually have, we'll call them multiple pipelines, but there's huge investments in terms of how do we recruit. We have at Microsoft, you usually come through either industry recruiting, which means you've been out of college, or you come through the university college recruiting process. And so there, we have kind of like a whole team set up to do college recruiting. So going to universities, it's tied with our internship program as well. And so a lot of the folks coming out of school, you typically go through that path. Now, the path that I work on mostly is industry recruiting. And so here it's anybody that hasn't been in school for over a year. You're typically going to come through this other pipeline. And so we have different recruiters, and we work with them to kind of get job descriptions out and get the word out, and to create different pipelines for folks that have been in the industry.
Okay. So I assume that that's a very different type of process when it's from a college, because I had Kira Weiss on the show like in the fall, and we talked about how her journey was from going to college and then coming into Microsoft straight out of college and becoming a program manager in the developer division. And so that's one kind of journey, right? And we have recruiters out in the colleges that help like basically funnel people in to get interviews and all this sort of stuff. And that's one aspect. And so, but how do you then do it if it's people that work in different companies around? Like, it seems to be a much broader sort of diverse type of hiring process.
Absolutely. In the last couple of years, I've been blessed with working with great recruiters. Like they're the ones that are kind of building these relationships and working through LinkedIn and helping us source candidates. And so the really, from our perspective, our job begins with defining what type of candidate we're looking for, and then we work with very closely with recruiters to help generate excitement around the jobs, using LinkedIn, doing public events or conferences and things like that, to where we can bring in more candidates. But it starts with, we've been blessed and really lucky to work with some pretty good recruiters that they've built up some of these connections and skills and processes.
Right. So that means that we have a role to fill. Like, we have a headcount. We need an engineer for that team over there. Then we go out and we try to find a profile out there in the world that matches using LinkedIn and so on. But what about the other way around? What if someone, like myself, I always dreamed of working at Microsoft. So what if there's people out there that they were not approached by a Microsoft recruiter, but they want to like basically put their number in the hat, and how can people do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have we have our job listings up in one of the links that you have. So we have a careers site at Microsoft that you can actually look at the different positions. So that link that's up right now is actually specific to it's filtering on dev positions, so part of our division. And so absolutely you can apply to those positions. Another good way to we often get lots of referrals. So people that we've worked with in the past or have partnered with either at Microsoft or other companies. And so oftentimes people will see some of these positions and other MS employees will refer them to us. And so that's a big channel for us as well. But yeah, the process kind of kicks off as soon as you apply, or somebody can refer you as well.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways. And I know that a lot of the of people on Twitter, like that works at Microsoft, like Amanda, for instance, our corporate vice president, she will tweet out very often, hey, there's a job opening here in this team, and then a link to that website that we just posted a link to here. And so that's a way to get in as well. That, is there a lot of that sort of organic sharing of those things, and how much is organically done, and how much is it like intentional from the hiring organization?
That's a great question. I want to say it's a little bit of both. So recruiters will definitely drum up interest through mechanisms like LinkedIn and other job posting sites. We definitely rely on our leadership, either through LinkedIn or through their interactions or their social media to advertise and to talk about that as well. I would say in the last couple of years, LinkedIn has been one of our main kind of avenues to get the word out in terms of positions. But we've had various kind of leaders use their Twitter accounts. Like you said, Amanda does that. Gus Perez does that as well often. Like, he'll send out a tweet, and then actually another way is to get involved with our repos too. We have lots of open source, and so in some cases you can contribute some there, and sometimes we'll use GitHub as another mechanism to kind of bring in new talent as well.
Oh, that's interesting. So does that mean that if someone sends pull requests, let's say, or comments on issues or something like that on the, let's say, the .NET, one of the .NET repos on GitHub, that we kind of monitor that and like might reach out to people that way?
Potentially, it really depends. So one of the things that I've been chatting with one of my managers, Ryan Kavanagh, who's our TypeScript lead, is we have lots of people kind of engage with us and part of the community, which is great. And oftentimes, you look at some of their contributions, that's a great resume, right? Instead of just listing stuff out on a piece of paper, just like contributing to these efforts. And so oftentimes we can also look at, hey, we have a particular opening in an area. Oh, we can look at who's contributed in that area that would be a great fit for the team.
And I'm guessing that some of the team members on, let's say, the TypeScript team, they already know that, hey, we actually have this person or these different people that have contributed in that space. Maybe we should reach out to them. Yeah. They probably already know that, right? Because they've been working kind of with them for a while.
Yep.
Okay, so this is very interesting. This almost brings it a little bit back to that whole, it's not what you do, it's who you know kind of thing. Even though that's not entirely true, because it's not just that you're commenting on people's Twitter or whatever. It's like contributing to make the code better or the documentation better or something like that. So it's not just that you're loud and we hear you.
Right.
There's more to it than that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the elements, though, because we focus a lot on developers, people are connected that way, right? So they're following Amanda for a reason because of the information that she gives out, or John Mont in the past, and so as people are gauge interest in kind of what we're doing as part of Visual Studio VS Code, that generates lots of excitement and energy. And we want folks that want to influence developers, right? And that's like one of the key aspects as we look for candidates is you got to really want to be working on dev tools. And so, there's lots of people that can code and lots of people that can do that, but we want the folks that really want to influence developers, either through tools, compilers, programming languages. Those are kind of what we're looking for. And the folks that are successful gravitate towards those technologies.
Yeah, right. And so Amanda Silva, if you want to follow her out there, she's at Amanda Silva on Twitter. And of course, also, while you're at it, go follow at Visual Studio as well. Because a lot of these job listings, they're gonna be posted through there as well. And how many job openings do we have? Like, is it really hard to get in? Is it like I have a needle, or do we have quite a bit?
We have quite a few. I want to say we actually, last I checked, some are opening and we're hiring all the time. And so at any given point in time, I want to say we probably would have about 20, 30 positions that are going to be open. One of the interesting things about this industry are people are, looking at new opportunities all the time, and we have new investments. And so depending on kind of what that looks like an org size of DevDiv probably has on the order of 20, 30 positions open at any given time.
Is that just engineering, or is that PM and UX and release?
Yeah, all up.
So we got a question here from Siva. How about the DevOps? Does that fit in the area?
DevOps.
I guess all our release management stuff is all like kind of DevOps, isn't it?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of. Sometimes I struggle defining kind of the specific roles in the sense of, DevOps can mean many different things for different folks. And so really for me, what it comes down to people that want to influence and build engineering systems, right? And so they can be the tools themselves, or they can be aspects of the build pipeline or the engineering system itself. These are all different aspects that I think are important. And we ourselves use our own tools and our own systems to ship Visual Studio VS Code and compilers and .NET and things like that. And so there's definitely different aspects of expertise that we need to develop as part of the organization. So it's not always just about building that compiler. It also could be building engineering systems that support building Visual Studio or building the .NET framework. And so DevOps definitely can fit into that area.
That's a really interesting thing for another show. Like, how do we actually build Visual Studio and release it, when we have our updates and all that? That would be a really good episode. And just to add to that, Alex, I think DevOps, well, you could join the Azure DevOps team and literally build the DevOps pipeline product and work on that team. That's another possibility.
Yep.
That was a good question. Thank you for that. And everyone else out there watching live on Twitch and YouTube, please keep the questions coming here. We'll try to get to them all. All right. So, Alex, so now LinkedIn or recruiters have found a potential candidate. So what is the next step? How do you get it? Well, I guess that they reach out to them and they set up some sort of meeting or something like that. But when do you get involved? At what point?
Oh, yeah, great question. So again, it really depends on how things come through, right? And so because we kind of have many different ways to kind of get through that process. And so typically as a hiring manager, what we'll do is we kind of work with recruiters. We'll do what's called kind of we'll do some sort of screens, typically a tech screen. And a tech screen can be that in of itself. There's many ways to do that. There's what we call kind of an online tech screen, which is kind of for some of our more junior positions. We actually have a mechanism to do kind of, it feels kind of like an online test where it's like, hey, find these bugs, fix these bugs kind of thing. But some of our more senior principal positions will actually do kind of live screens where we talk about experience, talk about kind of what they're looking for and kind of what the job is about. And so depending on kind of what avenue comes through there, it's typically some sort of screen. Either it's a conversation online or it's through one of the kind of online tech screen mechanisms, similar to kind of actually, no, I'm trying to remember if the university uses those or not, or if we do live. It's been a while since I've done that one, but definitely kind of once you get through that tech screen, if things go well through that, then we kind of do what's called a full loop, in which case we'll do kind of an interview loop that will have multiple interviewers on it, and hiring managers typically are on that thread as well. And so that's kind of a more in-depth set of activities so that we can kind of go through that process and then determine good fit for the team.
Yeah, right. So there's like an initial sort of vetting, and then you kind of open up. And then who's then interviewing? You said multiple interviews. Is it people on the team that's part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. In some cases, we'll do split loops too. So if like we have a particular candidate that's interested in multiple teams, and there's multiple teams interested in a candidate, we can like split between multiple teams. Some of the recruiting we do kind of through pipeline through a centralized mechanism. We're doing more and more of that at Microsoft. And so typically it's kind of our SWE 1 and SWE 2 positions. Now there's actually hiring events to where you'll typically go through some sort of online tech screen and then you get invited to one of these events. And then during that event, you'll talk to kind of 3 interviewers. Sorry.
Can you explain what is SWE 1 and SWE 2?
Oh, sorry. For engineers, we have software engineer 1 and software engineer 2. And so those are kind of your more early in career, lower level engineers. And
so junior position.
Correct.
First job type of positions.
Typically for SWE 1s, yes, it's your first job. SWE 2s tend to be a little bit more experienced, but not quite at the senior or principal level yet. And so for those candidates, yeah, we have hiring events available, and sometimes we'll do those full loops as well. Now for senior and principal, it's a slightly different process to where we will kind of, you'll also meet with folks on the team, but those can typically are more, I almost said in person. We're not doing very many in-person ones anymore, but it will be kind of a specific interview loop.
Yeah, okay. So there's like just a question here from Rosa. Does Visual Studio team also develop the new C# features, or is that a different team?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're all under the DevDiv banner. So not only do we do Visual Studio, VS Code, .NET Framework, the C++ compilers, our Python tooling, as well as we have some dev services as well. And so, yeah, it's all around the gambit of focusing on developers as customers. And so
Azure SDK.
Yep, that's right.
There too. Yep. Jupyter notebooks, all that stuff. Okay, that was a good question. Thank you, Rosa. Okay, so those different loops, depending on if you're a software engineer, junior, senior, principal, like you get to then interview them in person. So not you particularly, but I've been in several conversations or interview loops where I'm part of having someone coming in and talk to them for like an hour and give my assessments afterwards. And so I found that kind of cool that, there's a chemistry test. There's what is the purpose and how does that work? Like, why do we bring people like someone like me, for instance, from the team to talk to those candidates? Why is it not just professional recruiters that handle it?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think it's important to, there's many different aspects to that kind of make up an engineer's success on the team, right? And a lot of it, one part of it is kind of, are they able to, at least on the engineering side, are you able to code? Are you able to design and things like that? But we also look at different kind of, we'll call them core competencies, right? So communication or customer focus are different aspects that are also important for the success of engineers on our team. And so we have different folks on the team kind of meet with these candidates so to gauge these different competencies so we can get a better understanding of how well can they work in a team environment. Oftentimes people come in, it's not the coding skills that makes them successful or unsuccessful, it's their ability to work with others and be able to kind of work in a space. And so that's one of the main reasons why we have folks on the team themselves be part of the interview process, so that you can meet different folks on the team, but also get a gauge from them in terms of their work styles and see, is this someone that will be a good fit, not only just from a technical standpoint, but also from a team and partner standpoint.
And I think that brings in another kind of interesting thing, right? Because it's not just Microsoft or developer division or whatever that needs to, figure out whether the candidate would be a good fit or not. It's the other way around. People often forget that, the interview is as much the candidate saying, hey, is that team at Microsoft good for me? Would I enjoy working here or not?
Exactly.
And so there's kind of a balance there. How does that play out? Is that something that we call out specifically, or is that up to the candidate to kind of figure out on their own? Or how?
I think it's a little bit of both. Absolutely. So from anytime that I've interviewed for a team, for example, a lot of that it's not just about me, wanting to show my best to others, but also making sure that that's the right fit for me for where my career, where I want to take my career. Oftentimes when I talk to candidates, either through screens or informationals, a big part of it is just to understand what do they want? Like, what are they looking for? And so getting that understanding is key, because then we can, it could be that what they're looking for isn't exactly on my team, but a different team in DevDiv, or actually a different team at Microsoft. And then I can help make that introduction to another team. And so absolutely, it's not just us vetting them, but they're actually vetting us to make sure that we're the right place for them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because Microsoft is big, and there's always a lot of, I think at any given point, there's probably 1,000 job openings across the company, right? And in DevDiv, there's quite a bit as well. So let's just take a couple of questions here. There's one that I thought was really interesting. If I can find it, where'd it go? So this is about, here we go. How serious do we take Pluralsight testing and ratings? I want to expand on this a little bit, this question, because what I think what is meant here is, if you have done a lot of courses on Pluralsight, and if you have a profile there that shows you have a bunch of skills, let me expand on that. Stack Overflow, if you have a high number of questions that you've answered on Stack Overflow and you have a high ranking there, for instance, and other sites such as that. We used to have the MSDN forums where you would get points, remember? Uh-huh. How much does that kind of qualify you, or do we actively look for people there? How does that play a role?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. As I look at, and I'm going to put it in the same frame of degrees. Some people have degrees, some people don't. Some people have masters, PhDs, and really depending on the job and the hiring manager, it could matter more or it could matter less. For me, when I'm looking at candidates, I'm kind of looking at, for lack of a better term, kind of the area under the curve. What is differentiating about this person? It could be that these tests or these ratings are differentiating for this particular person, that they have that. I don't know if I have a blanket statement that says I would, absolutely, I'm going to look at that versus something else, because I think each person is unique, each person is different, and the team's needs are also different in terms of what we're looking for, right? In some cases, so just to kind of throw out an example, one of the things that's kind of interesting part of kind of how we're evolving the tooling experience and things is, Visual Studio, VS Code have been a very rich client application in the past, or we're looking at innovating, and the next level of productivity is going beyond just kind of what gets installed on the client. We're looking at, developer services, being able to connect to other locations, like with LiveShare. And so that's a different type of software, and that's a different type of capability that we're learning to do in DevDiv. In some cases, we're looking for new capabilities. So people that have created services and not necessarily Windows development. These are kind of different capabilities that we're looking for. And so because of that, it's hard to say that, if you have this education, or if you have this, then that puts you over the top. We do kind of look at what's needed on the team and what's differentiating about each candidate. And so it could help depending on kind of what we're looking for. But I wouldn't say it's the end all be all.
Right. And is it fair to say that like you don't need to have a master's degree as well? That's not no. Like if you don't have it, we don't even consider you, right?
That's not the case, right? Correct.
I mean, I know I don't have a master's degree, and I was hired, but that's over 10 years ago now, so that might have changed for all I know.
I don't have a master's degree either. So
there you go. So there's hope, people. So here, this kind of leads into another question, what you were mentioning, because what about the work that people have done in the past? So what if you made a front end using all sort of the Microsoft technologies? You're really good at a bunch of stuff, and you have a GitHub record that shows it, like you pull requests, maybe not to Microsoft, but to other projects, or maybe you have a bunch of open source projects yourself that show that you can think about like problems that we care about too, like what you were saying, LiveShare. Oh, maybe there's some peer-to-peer networking in some of those repos there that would be interesting. How much do we proactively look at that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can't speak for all. I can only speak to what I do, and I absolutely do kind of like looking at these side projects, or looking at kind of what they've contributed to in GitHub. These are all interesting data points that we consider as we look for new hires. And it doesn't always necessarily have to be Microsoft technology either, right? Like DevDiv, we've actually over the last couple of years have kind of expanded what we feel is important for our business and for Microsoft in general. And it's really I don't know if you discussed kind of our slogans, but it's like any developer building any app using any platform. And so, it's not necessarily just Microsoft technology that we're interested in. 5 years ago, we had no investments around things like Python or Go. And now, as we look about how do we contribute to the success of things like Azure, some of the platforms that we have at Microsoft, Azure is kind of, it needs to be kind of an everybody cloud, which means all technologies. It means Linux. It means, it's not just a Windows thing. And so we're actually very interested in folks that have some of those backgrounds.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So here, Parker on the question here says Microsoft technology, but that's not a requirement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because all technologies are potentially Microsoft technologies, or we want to support them on Azure or in our tooling and whatnot, right?
That's right.
Parker, that was a fantastic question. Okay, so that's interesting. So having side projects, be open on GitHub with what you're doing, sharing, and all that sort of stuff might be helpful. There was one question here about if all developers have computer science backgrounds, and I think we talked on that a little bit. But what are the educational requirements here? Can you go straight from 8th grade, and then once you're 18, is that the minimum age to work at I don't know, like, are there any limits here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say over the years, even like that I've been at Microsoft, there's people get here in all different ways, right? And in fact, I don't know if any of our positions today actually require, as part of the basic qualifications, necessarily an educational requirement. A lot of the industry positions we have, we look for either a CS background or relevant industry experience, or relevant coding experience. And so whether or not it's a specific CS background or not, it's not necessarily required. In fact, we at Microsoft, we have some programs to where I think we've called it LEAP or Imprenti in the past, to where these are folks that have come through a different path altogether, not necessarily studied computer science at college. Oftentimes, some of these folks are, they're looking at their second career, or they're from the military, and they're coming into these programs that's more like an apprentice program, to where they do kind of in-depth coding lessons in the beginning, and they kind of work with the teams, and then end up graduating to the program, and some of them land jobs here at Microsoft. And so we don't really have educational requirements per se, but we do look for folks that have relevant experience and can do the job that we're looking to fill on the team.
Yeah. So if we look at a related question here, what are the minimum skills then? I've noticed that, often on job postings around in the tech world, they always say something like under requirement, like that you have a bachelor or master's degree, or relevant experience, something like that. It's very vague. And so I think some of ours also say that, or they used to at least.
Yeah.
But what do we mean by that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the things that's changed over the last 5 years or so, that like these technical skills, coding, using computers to solve problems, isn't just a CS thing anymore, right? Like we have people in the financial sector building models using code to do so. You have people in data analytics using code to do so. And so it's not necessarily just computer science anymore. And so when we look at kind of the candidates coming in, we're looking for folks that can sling the code, that have built some of these apps, that have oftentimes, if they're self-motivated and they learned on themselves, learned by themselves, or done this outside of school, that's actually pretty impressive as well. And so really, when we look at these candidates, for us, absolutely, for engineers, you have to be able to do the day-to-day job. And a lot of that is writing code, it's designing, it's fixing bugs. It's honestly a lot of debugging, lots of fixing bugs. And so these are kind of the core elements of the job. Now, whether you pick that up through a class in college, or you've done that through a previous job, it matters less, but it matters most that you can do those things. And so, looking at the specific question in terms of minimum experience or education, I play it down a little bit, that we don't really require those. It's really about kind of, can you do that job? And are you excited about kind of the developer space, and are you excited about Microsoft? These are all things that we look for.
Yeah. And so I guess that kind of answers the question here from Dull Owl as well. The fact that you can design things yourself and you're a self-taught programmer, is that affecting the hiring process? Like that you're a self-taught versus, let's say, college taught? And I think you answered that, right? No, it does not matter how you got to be a good programmer.
Typically not. Yeah. Really, we're looking for the experience. Like how do you get the job done? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so here's one. I don't know this. HackerRank. Luigi asked, HackerRank tests are used in Microsoft selection procedures? Well, that's a question, I guess. Is it used? I don't even know what HackerRank is. Maybe you do.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with HackerRank tests.
So no is the answer.
Sorry.
No, probably. Okay. Man, there's some great questions today. Just keep them coming, people. Okay, so but before we dive into to this, there's some slinging code here. I'm a big fan of this expression too, slinging code. I think that was you, Alex, that said that. That's a great phrase to use. So, Rosa has another question here. How do you see the post-pandemic hiring process at Microsoft? Are we more open to full remote roles, or do you consider it important to be physically back on site once we open up? We're not opened up yet, in Redmond at least. Yeah. How has this affected the hiring process?
Yeah, I think that's a great point and a great question. I think we've had to adjust, and specifically with the hiring process, we've had to adjust to doing more things online. And Teams and other tools that we use. LiveShare actually is a really good interviewing tool as well. These are all changes that we have to make. And you also bring up a good point in terms of the criteria in which we look at candidates. And this is one thing that we're actually thinking about right now, which is How important is it to physically relocate to Redmond, for example, to work with the team, given that right now everybody's working from home? And so that's a great point. And honestly, I think from our perspective, we were already on this journey of because we've had different satellite sites, we've had different like, for example, when Xamarin joined Microsoft and joined into DevDiv, that's a team that was actually created where people are located in many different places. And so we were already on this journey of how do we build remote employees as more part of our culture. We continue to invest in that, and I think the pandemic is a great example of kind of being forced into this space, and so also provides good tooling opportunities. But absolutely, I think we are kind of out of necessity rethinking kind of how we do some of our recruiting and where do we target. I think there's definitely some benefits to being kind of in similar time zones when you want to work, or having within a team. Now it can be multiple teams, but having that is definitely easier to work around, but not necessarily a requirement. VS Code, a lot of it's done in Zurich, and we have a team here at Redmond that works with them as well. And so let me see how do you see post-pandemic hiring? Yeah, I think we're going to be evolving. I think we're going to be changing. I think we've built some skills and built some capabilities. I don't think we're going to return back to the way it was before. I think we're going to learn from this experience, and I think we're going to evolve.
Yeah, it's funny how more efficient we've gotten in so many different areas that we just had no idea that we would be, right? We thought it was going to be problematic. Right. And I guess recruiting is the same, because it used to be in person. Like, people would sometimes fly into Redmond to do their interview loop. They would have like a full day or 2 days or whatever it would be, and sit down with the different people interviewing them. And now I guess that's all done in Microsoft Teams. It's done with live share if there's some coding challenges, or maybe some person want to show us the code or something like that.
Yep.
Do you think that is going to stay? Is that still as efficient as the face-to-face, like chemistry? Do you really get the same out of the online experience as you do in face-to-face? Like, how does that going to continue?
That's a great question. And like I said, I think we're learning and evolving through this. And so it could be that we will be in a world that would be the default. Instead of forcing people to travel, we may do more stuff online. Yeah.
Did you travel? Were you local at the time you got hired?
Yeah, I moved up. I moved up from Texas, actually.
Okay. Yeah. So you had to fly in, do your interview loop?
Yep, that's right. I went through internships, but yes, I did fly in for an internship interview, and then I came in full time after that.
Yeah, I need to have an intern on. I think we're gonna get interns in the spring again, right? Usually.
Yeah, it's late spring, early summer. Yep.
Yep. I think that would be an interesting thing to interview an intern, to just get more info about that. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, these questions are just fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. All right. So now the candidate has gone through the interview hiring process, or the interview process with, I guess there's a recruiting team, or there's a lead recruiter or whatever for each candidate that comes in, or is it per job post listing?
Yeah, we typically work with recruiters on level bands. So we have a different recruiter depending on the type of candidate that we're trying to hire.
Yeah. Okay. So they go through the process, and then each of the interviewers, how do they say? Do they each say yes, it's a go, or no, it's a no go? And like, how does that work? Is it the average? Oh, if there was 5 interviews and 3 of them said yeah, it's a go, then 3 is more than 2, therefore it's a hire. Like how
yeah, that's a good question. So basically, after we've gone through, everybody's had a chance to chat with the candidate. Typically, there's somebody on the loop that it's either a hiring manager or some senior engineer in our case, or senior PM, some leader will kind of drive a discussion, and so we call them kind of a loop debrief. In which case, we talk about, hey, what were the things that we saw that were going to be strengths for this candidate if they were to get an offer, or what are some inhibitors? What are some things that would be challenging for this person? And so we kind of get together and have that conversation. Along the way, what we've tried to do is kind of eliminate bias from some of the system. So really, the debrief is typically the first time we get together to talk about a candidate. That way, we don't have people influence folks along the way. And so once we get into the debrief, then we kind of each person has 5-10 minutes to kind of talk about what were the things that they saw? What did they thought the strengths were? What did they think the challenges or areas of improvement were? And then collectively we had that conversation. And then the hiring manager or the senior leader typically makes the final call in terms of the data that they've heard.
So you're basically telling each of the different interviewers that they cannot talk to each other during the days of interviewing that same candidate until they get to the debriefing at the end of the day, let's say.
That's correct.
Okay. That sounds like a hard thing to do, or is it like that's easy?
So we used to do handoffs, but yeah, we've changed that process over time. And really it's good because everybody gets individual reads, and so they're not unnecessarily influenced from the person before. And then the debrief discussion is good because then they can compare notes and see and to see how the candidate did.
Yeah. And so after the debrief, you decide, the hiring manager or whoever decides, yes, let's hire this person. And then do you just hand it over to HR, says, hey, we would like this person, make it happen? Is that how it
works? Pretty much. At that point, we decide together, hey, yep, this is hire. And then based off of experience what's the offer, and then typically the hiring manager will work with the recruiter on with what's the offer package and all that fun stuff, what compensation package and all the details of that. And then once that happens, then the recruiter tends to roll out the offer to the candidates.
So this is the stage where you would then, as the candidate, you would start negotiating. So no, I want a higher raise or a higher salary or something like that. Happens at that point. It doesn't happen with the dev interview team or anything like that. That's
correct. Yeah, and typically, actually, it's the recruiter that does that part. And so, like I said, we get to work with great recruiters, and they kind of handle the compensation discussions and things like that. The hiring managers tend to can do approval in terms of, yep, that's in line with the experience, that's in line with what we're doing for our business. But ultimately, it's the recruiter that kind of works with the candidate to figure out the right package.
I really like that. That means that you and DevDiv, like what you're doing, and the different team members that are part of the interview loops, they can kind of concentrate on, the technical aspects and work in there and the chemistry, and leave kind of all the other stuff aside.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. Okay, so now this person is hired. Do they start the next week? Like, how does?
Yeah, in some cases that's great. And I think one of the big challenges we've had, especially through the pandemic, is getting people onboarded. That's definitely been kind of one of these tough things to do, especially when you're not going to a building or going to campus for some of these things. And so, but actually, like, the onboarding process was something that we were looking to improve on in DevDiv actually like 3 or 4 years ago, which is, how do we start folks on the right foot? And set them up the best so that they can kind of integrate with the teams and do their best work. And each team kind of has their own kind of processes in terms of, their onboarding buddy, and kind of they have their own wikis and things like that in terms of where do I check in code and things like that. But one of the interesting things that was discovered 3 or 4 years ago is that the onboarding experience was kind of tough. Specifically in the PM discipline, because PM is not really a defined role outside of Microsoft per se. And so really there needed to be something to kind of help establish like the role and what that role was. And in DevDiv, we take that kind of a step further, is that we love for folks coming in to kind of understand what they're getting into. So better understanding of why does DevDiv exist? Like, what's our business? Why are we here? As well as establishing kind of how we want to work. We actually talk about core engineering values around things like, being data-driven, focusing on customers, being inclusive and being diverse in nature, and committing to quality of our products. And so these are all kind of, we do kind of a little bit of a boot camp. We typically do that once a quarter with all new hires joining us. And we kind of set these expectations of, hey, this is how we want to do work, and welcome to the family.
Yeah, I think I've been part of a few of those, and I think it's such a great thing. It didn't exist back when you and I started. And I think the first time we rolled it out, like 3-4 years ago, whenever it it was like 2 full weeks, wasn't it? Of like introduction to everything around DevDiv as a program manager. Was it only program manager?
The first one was only program manager, yeah, and then we added engineers after that because we got great feedback in terms of its usefulness, and after that first one, we actually added engineers as well.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. Like in the beginning, we were kind of trying to figure out what should the content be of the presentations during the day, and I was involved. I had a 2-day hackathon or coding. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that.
And the challenge was work on something that may not be what you're working on today. Try to build if you're .NET, let's say you're working in Visual Studio on the .NET tooling team in Visual Studio, try to go build a Python app or something like that using the documentation that we have available and whatever you can find online, and see how our tooling actually works. And it was kind of a lot of fun, and it also showed us like, oh man, the importance of documentation and all sorts of things. And how do you open a bug if, hey, this doesn't actually work the way we thought it was going to work? Well, how do you open a bug, and how do we make that easier, and how do we resolve those things?
Yeah.
It was very fun. I think people liked it, but it got cut down to 1 day, so maybe 2 days was too much.
Yeah, part of the process, we're always gathering feedback from the attendees and hopefully improving on the process. And so it's still kind of a 2-week thing but the first week is only 3 days now. And where we have presenters come in from the team, various leaders from across the division come talk about different subjects. And then the second week is this kind of, it's a customer workshop that our designers and researchers kind of put on. It's an awesome workshop that it really kind of walks you through this. How do we develop features? How do we interview customers? How do we define hypotheses and validate them, and then drive towards solution hypothesis? And so it's a great kind of 2 week of the boot camp.
Yeah. I wish that existed back when I joined. When I joined, it was little bit like being thrown at the wolves. I remember day 1 was sort of the info day, the new employee orientation day, which still exists.
Yep, that's
like basically, yeah, the bathroom is down there, and go to this website to see your, whatever.
Right.
But it's kind of a nice welcome, and you can see all these other people that start the same week as you. And I think when I started, it was like about 100 people starting that one day across all of Microsoft.
That's right.
And then I was shown my office. Back then we had like individual offices, and it was like, oh yeah, and sit down here. Your email is working. Kind of figure it out. And so it seems like we've come a long way.
Absolutely. Yep.
So we have some cool questions here. So here's one from Timmy. Does Microsoft message people and ask them to come work for Microsoft? So, like, for instance, if you meet them on Twitter, or you've done a NuGet package that gotten some attention or something like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I don't want to say we don't do that, but I don't know if it's like a go-to thing. I definitely, jobs are kind of one of these things where it's the timing, like the job is open and you find a candidate, like all this kind of comes into play. And so certainly if there's folks that we've worked with or partnered with in the past that we think would be great for a position, we would absolutely go chat with them to see if they're interested in doing something else. And these connections can be through anything, right? Like sometimes it can be through a partnership, or sometimes it's chatting with a customer, or sometimes it's going to a conference, or it can be any of these things. And so I don't know if typically we'll cold call people up, but I don't want to rule it out because we've definitely looked through things like contributors to our GitHub and stuff like that to say, we have an opening for somebody that might be a good match here. And
actually, that's how I got hired. I was he doesn't work at Microsoft anymore, but the hiring manager at the time, he reached out to me on Twitter and said, "Hey, have you considered this job?" And then a link to the job listing for like Visual Studio, web tooling in Visual Studio, right, for .NET. And that's how I got in. But I was an MVP at the time. That's another channel in, like, there's all these different channels that you've been talking about, like GitHub and sending pull requests. And, but I guess also being active maybe on Twitter, is that helpful? Like you actually get to know the people that work on the teams within DevDiv a little bit more? Could that be an advantage?
Possibly. I don't know. It's not something that I think we're intentionally, like, for the purpose of recruiting, we're going to go do this. But I think it can be serendipitous depending on the positions that are open, right? And as we interact with others, and like, do they come to mind when we say, oh, we have a position? Like, I'm sure for you it was similar to, oh, we have an extensibility position, or ASP.NET. Oh, this person's done a lot of work here, so we should chat with this person, right? Yeah. And so.
But there's no, but you don't get a shortcut. You still have to go through the same loop. So it might be a way that your name gets put in the hat,
right?
But you still have to make the loop and be the best qualified person for the job, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good one. Here's another one from Rosa. While working inside of Microsoft, how easy or how often can you move to another team? How does that process work? And we just talked about this before we went live here.
Yeah, that's a great question. Rosa's hitting it out of the park today. Yeah, I would say that Microsoft-wide, we definitely have. So part of our industry recruiting, we also have internal recruiting. It's gone through the same channel. So all the job postings that we have, internal Microsoft people also have access to see those jobs as well on the same career site, and they're free to open up and apply to those positions as well. And so across Microsoft, across divisions, you can definitely do that. One of the interesting things we actually do in DevDiv, and this, we actually focus a lot on the individual contributors on the team for this, and sometimes even some of the early in career folks, is we have this, I guess we've done it 2 years in a row. So maybe it's an annual thing now, to where it's called, it's under the banner of a group called Career Mobility. And really, it's what we do here is, I think it's officially called the Career Exchange, to where if there's folks that are interested in the next steps of their career to learn a different technology, or to work on a different part of the products, or to join a different team, we actually have this, it's kind of like a career fair where the first time we did this, when we were in the office, we actually set up tables in a big conference room, and then each team kind of talked about what they're working on and what their goals were for the next year. And then people can kind of go around and gain information. And then at the end of it, you filled out a survey and said, oh, I want to work on this team. And then you put like 3 or 4 choices on there. And then typically after this event, what they did was they tried to kind of match what you wanted to do. Oftentimes, a lot of people didn't want to change jobs, but we still like the career fair because it was a great chance to chat with folks that we haven't chatted with in a long time and hear what other teams are working on. But some of them do take advantage of that activity, and they end up moving to a different team. And so, like last year, we had a couple of people join our team as a result of that, and we've had folks kind of go to other teams as well. And so, one of the things is that we do want to kind of, how do we facilitate this, especially if you're looking to do something new, or if you're looking in terms of, I've done this now, I think I'm really interested in this other aspect. I want to go learn more about it. And then you can go talk to that manager. And then through this effort, you can actually switch teams. And today, the way we do it is within our division. And so within our CVP, so under Julie Lucen. And so that it's easier for us to make changes in talent movement that way. But absolutely, when you're inside Microsoft, these are different avenues that are available.
Yeah, it's really cool to see just like all the people that move within developer division, like, because I think like for a lot of us, we just love technology and we love developers, and so there's so many different ways we can help out, or we can, and so sometimes it might be TypeScript, if you're into web, let's say, or whatever it might be, and you can actually make the move. And so we try to match is it like you have 3, you said 3 or 4?
Yeah.
Your wish list. It's like going to college, right? You have like which colleges you prefer to get into or whatever. It's the same thing here. And it's then binding. Like you have, if you say that you want to go to the TypeScript team, and when the puzzle is then laid afterwards, you then have to go to that team. You can't say, oh no, I won't, because it was only maybe my second choice. No. You kind of signed up for it. Otherwise, the puzzle will never go up if people can like
That's
go
right.
back and forth.
Yep.
And how many people do this?
Oh man, Gus is gonna kill me because he sent the summary and I can't remember. I want to say we had maybe 20 people do this last year.
I heard it was like more, like double.
Was it more? Oh,
I don't
man,
know.
I can't remember. I'm sorry.
It's like, I don't know, if I didn't hear it from official sources. So I just heard around 40. And the year before it was a little bit more. Is that right?
Oh gosh, it was. Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't.
Not, so no, let's not because we're just guessing. We don't really know.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Yeah, me neither. Okay. Yeah. So I hope, Rosa, that answers the question, that you can definitely move around, and in DevDiv it's even easier.
Yep.
So that's cool. Okay. So we got through a lot of cool questions today. And I think you took us, Alex, through the entire journey of like how to get into the funnel, and we go through the interview loop. You start your job and you go through the boot camp to get you a good start, whatever team you might be in. I just one last time here, I want to put that banner up again in case people missed it. So this link that's now in the video, aka.ms/dd-careers, that's all the current open positions at Microsoft in developer division specifically. So if you want to work on Visual Studio or .NET or C++ or whatever, go check it out. Let's see. Do we have any last questions? Yeah. So just to be absolutely sure that here. So we kind of answered this already, but I think it's worth repeating. Alex, if someone has 15 years of experience in C++ or Python, but no experience in Microsoft technology at all, like .NET or ASP.NET, can I then join Microsoft? Am I eligible to join?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, you bring a point of view that we may not have, because we have been at Microsoft and we have been working on Microsoft platforms. As we mentioned before, any developer building any app on any platform, that's what we're trying to influence and try to build tools for. And so having that different perspective is actually great. Azure success, when we think about Azure and kind of as an anybody cloud type of situation, that's all technologies. And so absolutely, you don't have to be entrenched in Microsoft technologies to come to Microsoft.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for your questions and for following us here, learning about how in DevDiv we hire people. So thank you for joining us for the past hour. And Alex, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. It was super cool. And I hope that everyone feels inspired to go chase your dreams. If that means working at Microsoft, you now have a URL to go to and make that dream come true.
Thanks for having me.
All right. See you next week, everybody. Take care.
Bye.